Hi there, and welcome back to the Community Strategy Podcast. My name is Deb Shell. I'm a creator turned community builder. After launching my online community in 2020, I have a passion for online events and bringing people together. I now consult business owners and leaders just like yourself who have a message, their life's work, or a vision for helping others transform through their online courses, cohorts, or memberships. On this interview style podcast, you'll hear conversations with community leaders, passion for bringing people together online. Our goal is to provide you with interesting conversations to inspire you to build, launch, and grow an online community with energy, confidence, and purpose. Let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Community Strategy Podcast. Thank you for joining me today. If you've opened up your app on your podcast, I'm super thankful wherever you're listening. I hope you're finding a little bit of calm today. Excited about today's guest, Richard. He's the founder of Feverbee, an international company consultancy, and he's the author of Buzzing Communities. He's worked with brands such as Google, Facebook, Oracle, Wikipedia, and many more. Prior to that, you worked with Seth Godin, so we can talk maybe a little bit about that. But welcome, Richard Millington, to the Community Strategy Podcast.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I've seen a bunch of these, so it's exciting. It's exciting for me to finally be on it.
I know, right? So glad to have you here. It was great meeting you. I met you. I read your book, the Buzzing Communities. I think I read that in like 2020-ish. Maybe 2021-ish, maybe.
Yeah.
And then met you at Clicks Community Leaders Institute Expo earlier this year in Memphis.
Event. Yeah, that was an interesting event.
Yeah. So, but tell everybody, maybe people have or haven't heard of you. Tell a little bit about your backstory, how you got into the community industry.
Sure. Do you want the long story or the short story?
Give me whatever story is not going to take up too much time.
Sure, I'll try and give you the minute-long one, or maybe slightly longer. So I founded, or let me go a bit before that. So I got into online communities like a lot of people in this space in the online gaming sector, because gamers were so far ahead back then. This was in like 2001, 2000, sometime around then, where we all began playing games online, and then we realized there were communities, growing up around all these games, and then we began building communities around these games. And so did that for a while, and then I did a university degree. Then about halfway through that, I had to do a year working in the industry in like a marketing agency, and then we had a client that wanted an online community, and I was like the only person that had any knowledge of what an online community was. That was when I kind of realized that, wow, you can build communities for business and get paid for it. So then after that, I started a blog about online communities, the Feverbee blog around 2008. And then it just steadily grew from there, really. More people began to read it. Like, the interesting thing about a blog, I think, is that when you first start it, no one reads it. Like, even my mum did not read that blog because it was too boring for her, right?
Not your mom?
And so,
no? Okay.
No, I don't blame her. It was horrific. I look back at some of those posts and I cringe. But maybe it's a bigger concern if you don't cringe at what you wrote, 12 years ago or whatever, 14 years ago. So it's 2008, and gradually after like months and months, I got around 100 people began to read it, and then 200, and then it slowly grows from there. And I think there's a lesson in sticking with it. And then people began reaching out, hey, can you help me grow my community? And everything just kind of took off from there. So, we began growing a business around that, began getting some fantastic clients that we've been able to work with over the years, and really just expanded the services we offer, from strategy to training to data to analytics, like really expanding and trying to offer as much value to our clients as possible. And now we're in this very fortunate position where we've got like the kind of clients that I've always dreamed of working with. We've got like a team that I absolutely love, and we're just doing the kind of work that that we really enjoy.
So gaming was the entry path for you to coming into this community space.
Gaming, I think, for many reasons, will always be quite far ahead of the curve. Partly because you've got a lot of kids with a lot of time to kill. And you've got a lot of kids with, a lot of online motivation to kill each other. And that breeds a lot of debate.
Yeah,
And I
that's
mean
true.
that in like the metaphorical way, obviously. And
Yeah,
partly
right.
because you've got a lot of early adopters there that want to use the new technology, the new thing. They have the time to learn all those tools, and so gaming is always really far ahead. And so, yeah, I'm always really excited by that space. I don't have many clients in that sector these days, but it's always been a very exciting space to follow.
Yeah. So interesting. And what are the things that made you keep staying in the space of community building beyond, like, was it connections of people that you met? What's the magic, or what do you feel like really keeps you
Hmm.
going in this space every day of staying in the
Uh,
industry?
it's evolved over time. Like initially, starting my own business is more like I can be my own boss, and that was quite appealing back then. And then it's more like, wow, I'm making money from doing this. That's fantastic. That's amazing. And then it was like the challenge of growing a team, and now it's just we get these projects that are so complex, and it's like solving a puzzle.
Mm.
And you get all these data and inputs. And for me, a lot of community building is about solving that puzzle for our clients, figuring out what are the best practices that should be in place here. What's the solution? What are the things that their members really want? And you get to work with a lot of organizations for usually a relatively short amount of time compared to their lifespan, and you get to see the immediate impact of what you do, and that's really exciting. Like it's such an exciting thing to be doing, and it's not for everyone. Like if you work for any agency or consultancy, you know that you're hop from one project to the next, and that can be a challenge. So for some people, working for an organization might be a much better fit. But for us, it's just exciting. Like it's a different challenge every day. You get such a diversity of experience with all the different clients. So yeah, I think it's just a challenge. That's always very exciting.
Yeah, just the ultimate interesting puzzle to put together of belonging. How do you create belonging? How do you cultivate conversations? How do you spark and inspire others to connect
Mm.
in different and unique ways? Right?
Well, it's like a puzzle where you get like the data side of things, you get the qualitative data, you get your experience, you get the business goals, and then you have to look at it and figure out, okay, how does all this fit together in a way that works? And if you don't get all those things to work, then the community doesn't work. And yeah, it's always really interesting. Like it's really interesting when we get to that point with a client where we've done the discovery or the research part of the work we're doing, and we're looking at the next steps and what the best road forward is. And that's like the really exciting part. That's the part I love.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. So, what's it look like to work with you and your team today? Kind of what things are, what's the steps in the process? What do you see? Like when people come to you and you said you've got these interesting things. Like, can you give us an example of what's an interesting puzzle that somebody approached you with, and what did that look like for you and your team?
Yeah, I won't mention specific names because I want to be respectful of
No,
the
that's
agreements we have
yeah,
with
but
them.
just an
But
example, like
I'll give you examples. Like there's one client we're working with at the moment where they have a community where engagement is declining, not through anything that they're doing wrong. It's mostly because the trends are working against them. People used to go to this community for a reason, but now there's so many other places where people can go for this kind of information. And the challenge is, should they keep, the community going? Should they move to a new platform? Should they cut the costs? They're getting a lot of pressure internally, and it's a team with a significant budget and a significant size team, and so it's more about figuring out, all right, what's the point when like the threshold is crossed, when it doesn't offer enough value to the brand to keep going. Another project at the moment is starting a new community from scratch. It's a competitive field, but they have a very unique proposition. But even then, you've got to figure out, people are so used to visiting different platforms at the moment. How do you get them to come to this platform, and what is the unique value they're going to get from it? Um, Another client we're working with has a community that's very successful, but they want it to be aligned to best practices in everything that they do. Like their goal is to reach the absolute peak in everything, and they've got the resources to do it. It's actually kind of interesting. When I first began doing this kind of work, a lot of our marketing was, your community isn't doing well. We can help you do it better. And it wasn't really that effective because people that aren't doing community well usually don't know they're not doing it well. And usually they're not doing it well because maybe they don't care that much. Maybe it's not a
Mm.
priority for the organization. When we began saying, you're doing it well, we can help you do it better, that was a far more effective route to go down, because then you get to work with companies that really care about communities, and you get to help them take it to the next level. And so, yeah, that's kind of like being the approach. So every client is different. Like everyone is always very different, but some of the challenges come up time and time again. And the process is usually, again, it varies, but it's usually we spend a lot of time researching the members of that community. We do a lot of UX testing with members. So we'll have members that will go through the community like a shared Zoom call, and we'll have them just say what they're thinking or what they're feeling and how they interpret what's happening in that community. We'll build up a whole bunch of recommendations from that. We'll do a detailed dive in the data of that community. We might build our own dashboards or data pipelines to figure out, what is the ROI, what is the retention rate, what parts of the community need more attention, what need less. So we have a really detailed set of recommendations, and once we've completed that process, it's usually where we present it to the client, and then our prioritized list of recommendations of what to do next. Sometimes that's like the short, medium, and long term, but it really depends on what the client needs.
Yeah. So as a fellow consultant, I'm going to pick your brain a little bit and ask you, where
Yeah.
did you start in your consulting business? Kind of what was the steps that led you to feeling like you could put out there your offers? I mean, like, was there anyone you leaned on in your process of starting out in consulting in the first couple of years?
You know what's amazing? When I started consulting, so I must have been around, I think there must have been 2010, I think, was when it properly began. So I don't know how old I was at that point, maybe 24, 25. I'm amazed that anyone hired us at that point, because I was so young. I had no idea what I was doing. And yeah, it's amazing that we got any work at all. I think part of it is you learn from every client you work with. Like that really helps. We tell a lot of clients, we'll never know our customers as well as you do. We'll never know your organization as well as you. That's not our role. What we bring to the picture is that wide angle lens. We know best practices in so many different situations, and what works across communities and what only works in one community is we can tell you the difference and guide you through that process. So to answer your question, like, I don't think I ever had a sudden realization, oh, now I'm comfortable doing it. It's more like initially I was doing one small piece of the puzzle, which is these are tips to get more engagement. That was like what I was probably selling back then.
What resonated, the
Now,
messaging that resonated with people, right?
yeah. And if you read like my first book in 2012, like yeah, you see a lot of that there. And then it just gradually expanded. Like the more we learn about our clients, the more we're like, okay, they need this, this, and this. So let's get incredibly good at this. Like so we're doing a lot of data work today, really deep,
Yeah.
extracting the data, cleaning it, building pipelines, all of that kind of stuff. And a lot of that is from learning from our clients. We interviewed so many organizations in this space, figuring out what the best practices are, figuring out how they do it, figuring out how we can do it ourselves, and then we can offer that as a service to our clients as well.
Hmm.
There's always going to be some point, or like that chicken and the egg. To get experience, you need to have experience, right? And that's always going to be a challenge. But I think everything you do, you've got to do with integrity. If you haven't got much experience doing that, then maybe do one for a client for free or do it at a discount and just be honest with them. Hey, we think we can do it, but if it doesn't work out, it's on us. Pay at the end if you want. I think there's ways of getting around that. But I really think what makes a difference is just understanding what clients need, find out who does that incredibly well, which organizations do it incredibly well, speak to them, find out how they do it, and see if you can do it yourself. I think a lot of things will orientate around that.
Yeah,
Does that make
and you
sense?
you mentioned questions, and with a background in journalism and reporting, I know how amazing questions can be to gaining insights and understanding. So I'm guessing, and I know that your background in when I viewed, in addition to the Community Leaders Institute where I saw you present. You also presented recently at CMX Summit in California, and so and mostly focused on your focus has been really on metrics and measuring the value of community. And so I wanted to really understand and get your take on the importance of metrics, why you decided to focus there, and how you see that emerging as something that's really been a tool for helping community professionals and leaders in the space.
Yeah, ever since we began doing this, every organization I think has complained about the same issue, which is we don't have the data, right? Like pretty much everyone always says, and the vendors always promise them more data, and then no one's really happy. And so what we're trying to do is solve that issue. And there's, I think, 2 or 3 parts to it. One part is, what is the value of a community? Is this community worth doing? Is it worth investing more resources in? Can you show a clear, undeniable impact to that community? That's one part. The second part is the community healthy? You know, like if you were to look at how to improve that community, data should inform everything that you do about it. And I think it's like, if you were running, say, a local town, you'd get data about what's happening, because otherwise you're just speaking to a few people and making decisions based upon that. And that's not a terrible way of doing it. But if you only listen to the people that want to talk to you, you're going to get a very biased opinion of what's really happening. But the data shows you what people do, not what they say. And that's usually very reflective of what people actually want. And so when we think about data, we try to build a system for clients which gives them a level of insight, ideally beyond what any platform can offer. So we will gather all the usual engagement metrics, but usually we'll get that from the API, not the front end of the system. And then our goal is to figure out what's working, what's not working, what's important, and what's not important. And the importance can often come from qualitative interviews, or it can come from really understanding how people go through the process, UX research, those kind of things. And what's working or not working, you just look at where the trend lines are going. What we really want to discover is, where should the community invest more time? Where should they invest less time? What should they change, and what should they stop doing? And I think there's always a big disconnect on the data side, where people collect a lot of data and they don't know what to do with it. I mean, for example, if a metric you care about, or your audience cares about, goes up or down by 10% next month, what will you do differently? That's the question. And most people are like, I don't know. I send the reports to my boss. I hope that she reads them. And that's usually the end of the journey. And that's such a shame, because data can guide everything you do. When we look at it for our clients, we say, look, this metric has increased by 10%. If it's important to you, maybe you want to invest more resources in this and invest less resources or fewer resources in another activity where it's in decline. That's how you become data-driven about what you do. And then you can gradually invest more and more of your time and your resources and efforts in the areas where they're going to have the biggest impact. But you need real data to do it. And if you want to know the return on investment, you need to know, how is the community impacted members at a member level, not the aggregate level. And so a lot of the data we have at the moment is correlational information. Activity is going up and retention is going up. And that's interesting, but if the company is growing, or if the products are getting better, you'd expect both things to happen anyway. What we try to look at is, before and after someone joined the community, did their behavior change? Or what specifically, if we pull the data from the API and had those raw server logs in place, we can know specifically the sequence that members go through. We can know when they purchased. We can know what they did before they purchased. We can compare them to other groups that didn't join a community at that exact time. And we can have more precise insights. And that's where we want to be. Like, we really want to try and push the frontier. I don't always think we're successful at it, but I think we're really trying to push the frontier in how we evaluate a community and how we become more data-driven about the decisions we make.
Yeah, and is that something you feel like leadership is point on? Is it a conversation around? I think there's a good question there of, does leadership decide on what is important? Are those the decision makers? Are they the ones that really have to be on board with it, do you think?
I would say every organization is different. When we work with a client, we try to speak to all of the stakeholders understand what's important to them. And this will usually begin with a general theme, say retention. And retention is really interesting, but then our question is, well, what does that mean? Because retention is just a word, it's not a metric, right? So retention, how do you know if retention is successful? And they might say, well, customers are completing their trial periods at a higher rate than what they were, or customers renewed their subscription after the first year, and now we have a metric, right? And so we're like, all right, so we have a metric. We have to think about how can we analyze if the community is having an impact on that. But it always begins with what the key people want. Like it always has to begin at that level. Otherwise, we could come up with a bunch of data, and someone says, "Oh, that's nice. What's next?" But if we can clearly show that the community is having an impact, that's what we want to be showing. I mean, even just 2 days ago, we had one client that we've worked with for over a year now, like a big tech company, and they want to prove that their community is having an impact upon the people that complete that trial period of the product. And that's fantastic because now we've got a specific metric. We can compare it to people that don't participate in the community. We can have very similar journeys that people go through and really get specific about what the impact of that community is. And so that's what I mean. We can give a very precise answer. There's always a lot of assumptions that are built into any data equation or question that you put together. But we want to try and take people as far along that journey as possible. So if you speak to the stakeholders very early on, really try to understand their needs, work with them to frame that question in a data sense, you can deliver a lot of value there, I think.
One of the things that I'm working on with my colleague Todd, which I know he worked with you as well,
I know that.
and one of the clients that we've been working with, there's these discussions that, when communicating with leadership, there's a tendency for some people to really be seeing like all of the things. And so I was wondering if you had any ways that you kind of bring people into the vortex of we're just working within this little bubble, our bubble right now of what's important to us. We're not going to look at like what everyone else is doing or where everyone else is or like, all the things. I'm wondering if there's any challenges you've had around that with leadership of like, them comparing and just going through these questions without the focus of us versus the world and what it's doing.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't have the background on this, but I would think, all right, let's reframe this. If someone is asking a question of the community, we want to encourage that, right? We don't want to say, oh, the community isn't about that. We want to say, okay, this is what we need from you to investigate it. Or if you want to see a result from that, this is what you need to do. Because I think there's always an opportunity when anyone shows any interest in a community, I want to grab that because I want to draw them into a community and not say, nope, the community is not for you. I'd rather say, hey, yes, we can do that. This is the data you need to provide for us. We can look at it. If you want this metric to go up, this is what you can do to help us support it. And I think there's opportunities to build these cross-functional partnerships across all these teams because I think that's such an exciting opportunity. That said, there's definitely many times when, say, sales or marketing will say, hey, we want to use the community as a sales tool, and sometimes that's not ideal. Sometimes the community is not set up for that yet. There's ways of doing that and making that work, but sometimes the community is not set up for that. But again, we don't want to just say no. We want to say these are the conditions under which that will work. We want to provide examples of that. We want to showcase, what they can bring to the table to make that happen. And so I also think it's very important that no community professional or consultant comes up with the goals of the community themselves. I think it's really easy to sit down at a table with a blank piece of paper and say, hey, the goals of this community are X, Y, and Z. And then you can spend years trying to persuade everyone else how important these goals are and find yourself disappointed that no one takes it that seriously. It's far easier to go to your stakeholders or the senior leadership as high up as you can go and say, what's important to you? This is how the community can help. And then you're beginning with a goal they already know is important. And those goals, I think, I wrote an entire book about this, The Indispensable Community, a couple of years ago. And those goals are usually not what we might think. You know, I've had people use community as a focus group tool, an instant feedback tool to figure out if this should be A or B. We've had people use communities to like source like the top influencers to create reviews and be the number one thing on the trust comparison site. I mean, it usually goes so far beyond engagement. Yeah, I feel like I'm drifting a bit, but I think
No,
finding
this
out
is
what people
great.
care about is critical to
Yeah.
building
What
that
does it
within the
mean
community.
beyond the number? If I want 100,000 people in a community and I'm a leader on leadership and that's what I'm saying, well, what does that mean? Why? Why is it important? So I think it's the digger diving
There
questions
is,
that
yeah.
sometimes people don't want to answer, and maybe the answer isn't community. Sometimes it is, and it can be a place, and then other times it's like, well, that's actually not, or it's not now. It's the not now thing. It's the let's put this on a shelf for later, and right now here's what we're doing for the first 90 days. Right? How
Yeah,
long?
yeah.
Time frame. Time frame is always the question of like, how long does it take to build an online community in 2022? What are your thoughts about time?
I want to answer that question from a different perspective. I feel like when we talk about community, we talk about so many different things.
Mm,
Like there's so many different variants of that I feel more and more it'd help to be more precise about what we're creating. Because if you're building, say, a customer support community, say if you're Microsoft, also one of my clients, if they didn't have a community and they launched one today, they would have 1 million members tomorrow. Like there's sheer size and scale, the number of people that have questions and need to go somewhere to find an answer, it would be like that. I mean, they would have to do the platform and all that kind of stuff, but fundamentally, it'd thrive. If you are just launching, if you're say a hobbyist or a creator and you don't have a big audience and you want to build a community of tech enthusiasts around digital cameras or whatever, then you can do that, but that could take a year to get up to the critical mass point. And so more and more, I think it would be helpful to be more precise about the terms, because support is very different from a peer group, which is very different from a user group. And it's different from an advocacy group or cult brand. It's different from a customer success style community. And all of these have different timeframes that they take to reach that critical mass point. So support, if you do it right, shouldn't take that long, because you're redirecting existing questions from one place to another and attracting more. A customer success community where people are proactively sharing their best advice, that usually takes a lot longer, but it's usually the kind of community that people spend more time in. They go there to learn, not just to get an answer to an immediate question. Peer groups and user groups, tend to start from events or activities, and you can have one event of like 30 people. It goes well, then like 50, and so on and so forth from there. So I don't think there's one answer. I think it very much depends upon what kind of community you're developing. I think that's one of the things, when people mention like my first book, I cringe a little because I wrote that in 2012 and I read it now, it's 10 years ago. I was so naive. There's so many things that I'm like, yeah, that applies to some kinds of communities, but there's so many others that are just like, don't fall into that model.
yeah. So great. And you mentioned platforms. So jumping into platforms, the first question I get, I don't know if this is true for you. The first question I get as a consultant in the community space is, what's the right platform?
Yeah.
Where should I be?
I have my favorite response to that. If they ask me what's the right platform, I ask them what's the right car.
Yeah.
And also they're like, what? Because there is no right car. It's all about the needs, the budget, what you like, and all that kind of stuff. There isn't. I mean, there might be the best platform for a particular group of people with a particular group of needs, but there's no one best platform. Having said that, I think that we're seeing some general trends in place. Customer support seems to be drifting more and more to like the big enterprise platforms that have ideation and are designed for those kind of things. You've got some that are drifting more towards customer success. And then you've got the smaller platforms like Circle, Tribe, Mighty Networks that are catering more to the creator and the hobbyist crowd. You've got the meetup groups and Bevy that are doing like the user groups. So yeah, there's some general trends that are taking place. And then you've got people with low budgets that can stitch together a really great community platform just by using tools that are free and out there today. You can use tools that are relatively inexpensive, Facebook groups, Zoom, Slack. There's things you can do to design a really good community experience without having to use one of the top enterprise platforms that are out there.
Yeah, true. There's no one right answer. I love the
You know
car
what is
analogy though.
what is interesting about platforms is that we're seeing that the decision is made less and less often by the community team and more often by the IT team with like
Hmm.
the data privacy concerns. It's an interesting trend. And I don't think it's the best trend for us, but I can understand that it's so important that data is secure now that it's interesting seeing that happen.
Yeah, I think I don't know if you're feeling a shift, but I feel like there's much more of a shift away from social media platforms and more focus on where we're as a creator and an entrepreneur, it's less interesting or intriguing for me to build on somebody else's platform, and it's more interesting and um, I feel more secure in my own like experience of building a platform on my own website or things like that, where I have a lot more control versus these
Mm.
algorithms are fighting me on all the social media stuff. And it's like, you create these spaces and then is anybody actually seeing it? And I don't know about you, but when I go on Facebook, I just feel anxious. The second that I'm like looking at the thing, I'm just like, there's a million things happening and I get lost. And then I'm like 10 minutes and I'm like, where did I got to go back to like do what I was
You know what?
doing before this whole crazy thing happened on Facebook.
Yeah, I kind of feel I'm on the opposite sides of this. So I'll be clear. What I want to happen is different from what I think is hap- happening.
Ah,
And
yeah.
it's interesting that a lot of community professionals in our space, people do fantastic work, will often say things that today people want like hosted brand communities, on their own platforms, but they're saying that on Twitter, right? They're saying that on Facebook. And when you ask them what brand communities that aren't your own do you participate in, the
Hmm.
answer is often none. Or
Oh,
if you ask
really?
them, and that's what happens again and again. And I've asked this question a lot: what brand communities that aren't your own do you participate in? And the answer is usually none. And so these people who think hosted platforms are the future often spend a lot of time saying that on social media platforms. And
I
I,
can
I
see that.
think there has to be a little bit of awareness that what we want to happen and what is happening. I don't know. I mean, other people disagree, and I respect that, but I'm on the fence. I think there's definitely a use for hosted platforms, and I think most of our work is on them. But I think we're being a bit too dismissive, or maybe we're confusing what we want to happen with what probably is happening.
I got you. I hear you. I am in a lot of communities off of social media in other platforms like Mighty Networks and Circle and Disciple
Interesting.
and a lot of other places. So I'm almost, because I'm such a community builder, I'm on so many places. It's crazy. Okay, so rapid round of questions to round us out for the interview.
Sure.
When you started building an online community, you said that was back in 2010. So you've been building community for how long
I
about?
started Fever Bee in like 2010 as a company. As a blog, I think it was like 2008.
Yeah.
And my first community experience was around 2000, 2001, sometime around then. Yeah.
What's the biggest challenge since starting? Do you feel like of all the things you've experienced, like what was the one thing that was like the biggest hard rock to get past? If there was one thing.
Honestly, it wouldn't be a community question. It'd be a management question. And you can confirm this with Todd if you want. I always thought management wasn't that difficult because I figured it's kind of like a soft skill. How hard can it actually be? And then I began growing a team and I was like, wow, it's really hard. And this isn't critical of any past employees, it's more all about me. And I had this really difficult time early on where I was like, oh man, my motivations aren't quite in the right place and I don't have that skill set. I don't really know what I'm doing. And so I've never felt more out of my depth as when I first began hiring employees. And I feel so bad that being bad at management initially helped me be a lot better today. I still don't think I'm great at it, but like managing a team was the biggest challenge, and I was so young back then, and that experience really helped me learn. In terms of community, the biggest challenge, it's interesting. I can't think of a major one. Uh, I can I can think of one. There's one client that I remember was very difficult to work with because the CEO had very specific ideas about how she wanted the community to be, and they weren't right. We didn't walk away fast enough. And I think that's the lesson that we learned. Like sometimes you really want to make it work, but if you're 100% sure that you can't cut through, like you can't get the message through, you've got to walk away. And I think we learned a lot from that.
You can't want it more than they do. That came up in my last podcast with Lois. You can't want it more than they do. Like we want things to work, but we can't want it more than they do. Cool. What's the way you define success with your clients? Like, what do you establish as being a successful online community experience? What do you see that looking like?
Our definition of success is, have we delivered excellent work to them? Are they happy with most of our clients? They hire us a couple of times. Most of our clients have been with us for a long time, and that's what matters to us. We like our North Star in that aspect is relationships. That's why we show up at all these events. We build relationships. Having trusted relationships is the North Star that we guide towards, and everything we do is, how do we become a trusted person that they want to work with? There's no single metric of success for community, but if the client feels like they've achieved what they needed to achieve, that's what matters. Because I feel like there's no standardized metric. There really isn't. And it's more about, because sometimes we'll go in with a client and we'll train their team. That's great, but we're not measuring that by anything other than their satisfaction with the training. Maybe months later we can check in, or if we develop a strategy, that could be a strategy that takes like 3 to 5 years to fully implement every plank of that, and we will work with them 3 months here, 6 months there. So that's part of it. So I don't think there's a single metric, but me, I love that feeling. I really love that feeling when we've delivered excellent work, where we know that they find it useful and they're using it and they're seeing results from it. Whatever the results they care about, if we bring them closer to that, that's, I think, a really motivating thing.
The beginning, I was told by Todd to say hello and to ask you how you worked with Seth Godin. He was asking me that question.
Yeah, so shortly after I started the blog, Seth Godin did an announcement that he was doing a internship in New York, or just north of New York, in a place called Hastings-on-Hudson. And I was such a big fan of Seth. I can't even tell you how big of a fan I was of Seth. And I was a total fanboy of his. And I didn't get the initial one, but then I wrote to him afterwards. I think I cold called him actually and said, "Hey, I'd really like to do this. Can you let me work with you for a couple of months?" And he said yes. So yeah, it was like 2008. I was in New York for 3 months or so, and did an internship with him. I want to be respectful of his privacy here as well, but it was a really challenging experience. It was a really difficult experience, but he has a way of thinking out things with such clarity and depth. Like when he launches a project, it's very much, who are the first 10 people that you're going to tell? What will you tell them? Why will they listen? And there's still a lot of that infuses my thinking today. My only regret really is not taking more advantage of it. Like I was so in awe of him. Have you ever had that where you're so completely in awe of someone that you're like, oh, I don't want to bother him with my questions during my internship? And so I think if I could tell like younger Richie, it'd be like, pester him like crazy. You only get one shot of life. Well, what's he going to do? Like he's a really nice guy. He invited you here. He clearly wants you to be there. Like I wish I could go back in time and be like, don't be in awe of him. Just go for it. Because life's short. Like, yeah, I really
Life
wish I'd,
is short. I
totally
had that I had that shiny moment with you when I was at CLI, and I walked up to you. It was like,
Stop.
I get to meet you in person. I did, and we had drinks at the bar after, and that was fun. And so, yeah, I understand what you're saying. So the last question, final question, which you kind of shared here, but just in the frame of community building, what would you share with any new community builder if you could go back to the beginning of your journey, and tell yourself something? And you just mentioned that a little bit about Seth, but what would you tell yourself as a community builder just starting out in this space?
So as a community builder, I think I'd be a little bit lost for advice because I've been a consultant for so long, right? I feel it'd be like quite pretentious to be like, hey, you should do X and Y and Z. I do think the people that tend to really thrive can see community from the perspective of the higher ups. I think there's a bit of a problem in the community space where of this group think where people get together at events, they share how amazing communities are, and they kind of like gravitate away from reality a little bit. And sometimes you've got to be a cynic about community and ask the questions, because there's some communities, honestly, where we've looked at the ROI, we're like, oh, it's not generating a positive return. That happens, and some people think like, oh, you can't say that, but that's what the data says. If we're data driven, we've got to accept the data. So I think the most important thing is that community is great and it's good to be passionate about that, but try and understand what the criticisms are. Try to understand the weak links of community. Try to understand your boss's perspective on community. The more you understand that, that's how I think you're going to get ahead. Because if you now yourself are like, oh, my boss just doesn't get it, what's really happening is that you don't get your boss, And it's far better to understand that you're working for a company and the goals are to improve the company, and community is a channel through doing that. If you're in that kind of work, obviously. And so that's the advice I give. Like, I'd really spend time understanding the business as much as you do community, because that's how you can connect with everyone else. Yeah, I feel a bit cynical for saying that, but I truly believe that.
Building relationships is really the key to community building, knowing people better. And one of the things I kind of threaded through this conversation is just knowing people and individuals better is going to give you better insights on what is going to be consumed, how people connect and collaborate, the path through which we discover each other, in virtual spaces, is really about how we know people and how we relate to them. And the way we understand and relate to each other better, we will then understand how others relate. I don't know if that's what you are feeling, but that's kind of what I got.
Yeah, honestly. I mean, I can give an example because there's someone that I knew that was building community at was Fargo. It's stories in my second book. And when she was trying to, I think she inherited a community, and everyone around her was saying, it's never going to happen. There's so many compliance rules. They're never going to let you do anything with it. And she spent months just sitting with these folks, really taking them out to drinks, really understanding who they are, what their genuine concerns are, and not saying, oh, compliance doesn't get it, which is the kind of thing that community professionals sometimes say, like, oh, they just don't get it and they should. But really understanding what the concerns are and taking those concerns as seriously as possible, coming up with a plan to mitigate every one of those concerns. And I think that's how you get ahead. Like, obviously, you need to know about the community, but if you know about community and not about the business, you're not going to generate much value for the business. And so I think about that story a lot because I don't have any data behind it, but I suspect that the more people spend time understanding their stakeholders and taking their concerns seriously instead of dismissing them, the more likely they are to get ahead and understand what each rung above them needs from that community and design that approach to match.
Yeah, reaching out and just asking and understanding business better of if this is the goal to have sales in the next 60 days, well, that's a different shift or focus than if we're just trying to create brand awareness, versus if we're just trying to get out the message that we have a new community platform, or if there's whatever this message, how can community be a part of that experience? And how I think others as well too, I'll just tap onto that by saying community departments in addition to communities. So how do we connect the organization and have them all feel like they're kind of a part of it is something I'm really excited about working with teams on right now, of saying, great, this is the piece how marketing can contribute. This is how sales is going to contribute. This is how our customer service is working and partnering together. And I think in more conversations that spark that, and that it's like I don't know, there's two ecosystems, right? The community ecosystem of like the community members and that what's happening within the community, but also in an organization, what's happening in the broader organization in that community space of where people are relating. And if people are more on board with the community and they get what's happening, like instead of saying, oh, well, they don't get it, well, reaching out to the one person who you say that person doesn't get it and say, okay, tell me more.
Exactly. 100%.
Let's talk about that.
If you want someone to be on your side, take their side. I mean,
that's a good way to end right there. Oh, beautiful. I loved it. Good recap. Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much, Richard Millington, for being here. Thankfully, celebrating with you, and proud to have you on the Community Strategy Podcast. For everybody who's listening, what's the best way to learn more about what you're doing in the world?
Sure, just go to feverbee.com, www.feverbee.com.
Cool. And you've got 2 books, and is there any other 3 books? Sorry, which is the third one?
So it's Buzzing Communities, the Indispensable Community, and the one that came out last year, Build Your Community. I recommend buying that one.
That one. Okay. Yeah, that is the next one on my list for sure. And as a fellow author soon to be when I get my book published next year, I will definitely be supporting community builders who are writing books. So amazing. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you for joining us. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share this with a friend. I hope that I have found some amazing insights to glean here, and excited about the future of community in the next year. And so please share this with anybody you know. If you're interested in learning more about the communitystrategypodcast.com is where you can go to look at all the past episodes we've had. Until the next time, I hope you're finding calm in this day, morning, evening, afternoon, wherever it is for you. I hope you're finding a little bit of calm today and connecting with others in any way that makes sense for you. Till the next time, take care and see you later. Bye.
Hey, this is Deb Shell, and I am so psyched to let you know I am writing a book. Big deal, I know. Maybe it's not for you, but for me, it's a big deal. And guess what? I'm writing this book for you because honestly, as a new community builder 2 years ago in 2020, I had no idea what I was doing, and I really got confused easily. So I'm going to simplify things for you. But what I need from you right now is to actually help me make this book possible. And so you can support me with a crowdfunding campaign that I'm running through iFundWoman. I'm going to have a link in the show notes. Please support me. This is running from September 1st through the end of October. So I'm really hoping to reach my goal to be able to write this work style book. It's going to have worksheets. It's going to have templates. It's going to be something that you can actually use today. It's not a course that you have to take for 4 weeks. It's not a big book that's not going to give you actionable steps. You're going to be able to take action the same day that you read the book. I'm super excited about this. I've had lots of feedback from clients that this is what they want, this is what they need. So I'm putting it together, and I hope you can support me with it, and I hope it's going to help you. So let me know. Please check out the show notes for that link to the iFundWoman crowdfunding campaign for the new book I'm writing. It's called Creator to Community Builder. I'm so excited. Thanks for helping me if you've already donated.